The last words Cole's brother ever spoke bound him to a woman he didn't know and a life he never wanted. He was to marry Claire, the silent woman grieving in the corner. But as he stood at the altar of duty, he didn't realize his brother's promise wasn't just about protecting a widow. It was about hiding a secret that would bring a war to his doorstep. The promise had barely left his brother's lips when Cole Mercer felt the world tilt beneath him. Nathan lay in the cot, his breath rattling like wind through broken shutters, fever already stealing the light from his eyes. Cole sat beside him, holding on to his callous hand with a grip too tight to be gentle, but too loose to keep him from slipping away. Nathan's voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. "Take care of her, Cole. She's all alone out here." His gaze flicked toward the corner of the dimly lit cabin where a woman stood half in shadow. Her arms wrapped around herself as though she could keep the world at bay. Claire Dawson. Cole barely knew her. She wasn't Nathan's wife, only a woman his brother had promised to wed when spring came. Though spring was still weeks away, Nathan had asked Cole to be his best man, not his replacement. Yet here he was, the smell of sickness and pine pitch heavy in the air, feeling his brother's fingers grow cold inside his own. The last thing Nathan Mercer ever saw was his younger brother's pale, stricken face in the firelight. The last thing Cole heard was Nathan's final breath, thin as a sigh, and the quiet words that would bind him like chains. "She's yours now." Nathan died before dawn. Cole didn't move for a long time. He sat on the rough stool beside the cot, staring at the wall, as if answers might be hidden in the knots of the timber. Claire didn't cry, not in front of him. She stood like a figure carved from stone, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, eyes fixed on the lifeless form in the bed. When she finally spoke, her voice was brittle. "You don't have to." But Cole cut her off, his own words, rough like gravel dragged over steel. "I made him a promise. The wedding was simple, too simple. A local preacher paid in kind with coffee beans, and the last of Nathan's tobacco came to speak the words." Cole stood stiff beside a woman he barely knew. Claire's hands trembled as she said, "I do." And Cole felt the weight of her fear as much as his own. There was no kiss, no celebration, just the hollow echo of duty between them. When the preacher left, the cabin felt emptier than it had when Nathan died. That night, Cole didn't sleep. He sat at the table staring at the flame of the single oil lamp while Claire lay on the cot with her back to him. She didn't make a sound, but he could tell by the tightness of her shoulders that she wasn't sleeping either. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind outside reminded him that he had stepped into a life he didn't want but couldn't walk away from. He thought of Nathanoff, the boy he'd grown up beside the man who taught him how to break a horse, how to steady a rifle, how to laugh in the face of bad luck. The ache in Cole's chest was heavy, immovable, a grief he couldn't name. By morning, they buried Nathan on the ridge above the valley, where the pines grew thick and the ground stayed cool even in summer. Cole dug the grave himself, each strike of the shovel, biting deep into the frozen earth until blisters formed on his palms. Claire knelt in silence beside the mound of dirt, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles went white. Cole didn't pray. He just stood there staring down at the rough wooden cross, feeling like he'd been carved out hollow. When the wind picked up, he pulled his coat tighter and finally turned to her. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said. His voice was steady, but it didn't feel like his own. Claire nodded once. She didn't look at him. The days that followed blurred together. Cole fixed the roof-mended fences, tended Nathan's meager herd, all without asking for help. Claire cooked simple meals, scrubbed the floors, and kept to herself. They moved around each other like ghosts, neither knowing how to bridge the distance Nathan's death had carved between them. Sometimes Cole would catch her standing at the window, staring at the horizon as if waiting for someone to appear. Other times he'd wake in the middle of the night to the sound of muffled sobbing. Claire's face buried in her hands while she sat on the edge of the cot. He never said a word about it. The town wasn't far, but Cole avoided it. He didn't want questions. People talked always had. They'd talk about how Nathan died, about how Cole stepped into his brother's life, like a man wearing boots that didn't fit. They'd talk about Claire, how she'd come out of nowhere, no family, no past worth speaking of. Cole didn't want to hear any of it. One afternoon, Cole came in from the barn's shoulders, aching from splitting logs. Claire was by the hearth, her dark hair falling forward as she bent over a bundle of cloth. He thought she was mending something until he saw it move. A tiny hand pale as milk slipped free of the blanket for just a moment before curling back in. Cole froze the axe still in his hand. Claire's eyes widened when she saw him, her lips parting, as if she might speak, but no sound came out. "You've got a baby," Cole said finally. The words felt heavy wrong in his mouth. Claire swallowed hard, her arms tightening protectively around the small form. "I was going to tell you," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but there was a fierceness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I just didn't know how." Cole stared at her, at the child he hadn't known existed, at the woman who was suddenly more stranger than wife. 100 questions roared through his mind, but none of them made it past his lips. He could only stand there rooted to the spot as the fire popped and hissed between them. "Whose is it?" The words slipped out before he could stop them. Claire flinched. For a moment she didn't answer. Then she whispered, "Mine." Before Cole could speak again, the sound of distant hooves shattered the fragile quiet. His head snapped toward the window, every instinct honed from years in the frontier, screaming that no good ever came riding at dusk. Claire turned pale, clutching the baby tighter while the horseman drew closer, the rhythmic thud of hooves growing louder, heavier until they were just beyond the fence. Cole stepped toward the door, jaw-tight fingers flexing at his side. "Stay here," he muttered, though he knew Claire wouldn't listen. The knock came loud and commanding, the kind that didn't ask permission to enter. When Cole opened it, 3 men stood outside. The one in front smiled like a man who thought the world owed him. "Evening, Mercer." The stranger drooled, glancing past Cole into the cabin. "Heard there's something here that don't rightly belong to you." Claire gasped softly behind him, and Cole knew in that instant that whatever secret she'd been holding was about to tear both their lives apart. Cole didn't answer right away. He stood framed in the doorway, the cold wind knifing through the space between him and the 3 men outside. The lead rider had a grin that didn't reach his eyes, the kind of grin Cole had seen before, on men who took whatever they wanted because no one had stopped them yet. The other 2 men sat their horses like they belonged there, rifles resting casually across their laps, eyes scanning the cabin and the yard as though already taking inventory of what would soon be theirs. "What do you want?" Cole asked finally, his voice low and even. The lead man tipped his hat back with one gloved finger. "Not much. Just come for what's ours. Won't take a minute." His eyes flicked past Cole, settling on Claire. She had stepped out from behind him despite his warning, clutching the baby so tight it was a wonder the child could breathe. Cole felt the shift in the air. He'd seen it before, right before a fight broke out in a saloon, or a man drew too slow on his pistol. He knew what was coming, and yet he felt rooted to the floorboards, caught between his promise to his brother and the reality pressing in around him. Claire's voice cracked as she spoke, but her words came out steady. "You have no claim here. Leave." The man chuckled, swinging one leg over his saddle and stepping down into the snow. His boots sank deep, but he didn't seem to notice. "Ma'am," he said smoothly, "you both know that ain't true." Cole's gut twisted. He glanced at Claire, hoping for some kind of explanation, but her eyes stayed locked on the man in front of them. Whatever this was, it wasn't new to her. The man took a slow step closer. "Hand over the babe and we'll be on our way. Ain't got any quarrel with your new husband here." New husband. The words were a knife twisting something deep in Cole. He set his jaw. "You heard her?" he said, voice rougher now. "She said leave." The 2 men on horseback shifted slightly, their hands brushing their rifles, not drawing. Not yet, but close enough to be a warning. Cole's pulse thudded in his ears. He didn't have a gun on him. His revolver was hanging by the bed inside, just out of reach. Claw's grip on the baby tightened even more. The child stirred, letting out a soft, pitiful whimper. The sound seemed to spark something ugly in the stranger's eyes. "You ain't in a position to be telling anyone what to do," the man said softly, stepping closer still. He was near enough now that Cole could smell the faint tang of whiskey on his breath. Cole's fingers flexed at his side. He could lunge for the man, maybe wrestle him to the ground, but that would leave Claire and the child exposed. He needed to stall, needed to think. "What's your name?" Cole asked suddenly. The man blinked, surprised by the question. "Trent," he said after a beat, his grin widening. "Not that it matters. It matters to me." Cole set his voice like iron now. "Matters that I know the name of the man stupid enough to think he can take what ain't his." For just a heartbeat, Trent's smile faltered. His hand drifted toward the revolver at his hip. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then from inside the cabin, a loud crash echo of the children's tin cups had slipped from a shelf where Claire had left it earlier, clattering to the floorboards. The baby began to cry in earnest, now a sharp wail that cut through the tense silence. Trent's eyes snapped past Cole toward Claire. That was enough. Cole lunged his shoulder, slamming into Trent's chest with the force of a charging bull. They went down hard in the snow, Trent's revolver skittering away as the two men grappled. The other riders shouted, spurring their horses forward. Claire backed away, clutching the baby close, her face pale, but her eyes burning with something fierce. Fear, yes, but also resolve. Cole swung hard, his fist connecting with Trent's jaw. But Trent was strong and quick, rolling them so that Cole found himself on his back, snow filling the collar of his shirt. Cole! Claire's voice cut through the chaos. She darted to the door, grabbing the revolver from beside the bed. Her hands shook as she aimed it, but she held it steady enough to make the riders pause. Back off, she shouted, the baby still cradled against her chest. The riders hesitated, eyes flicking between Cole Trent and the barrel of the gun Claire held. Cole took the chance, ramming his knee up into Trent's side and shoving him off. He scrambled to his feet, chest heaving, and grabbed the dropped revolver from the snow. The standoff stretched. The only sounds the wind through the pines and the baby's cries. Trent spat blood into the snow, then slowly raised his hands. Fine, he said, his voice dripping with false ease. Well, go for now, but you best believe, Mercer, we're coming back, and when we do, you won't be ready. Cole's jaw clenched, but he didn't lower the gun. He kept it trained on them as Trent mounted up, glaring at him with murder in his eyes. When the three men finally rode off, disappearing into the trees, Cole let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Claire still stood in the doorway, the revolver trembling in her hands, the baby crying softly against her chest. Cole stepped toward her, taking the gun gently from her grip. You want to tell me, he said quietly, what the hell that was about? Claire looked at him, her face pale but her eyes wet with unshed tears. I didn't mean for any of this, she whispered. Hull stared at her, at the baby at the trail where Trent and his men had vanished. And for the first time, he realized that Nathan's dying wish had bound him to far more than a stranger. It had bound him to a fight he didn't yet understand, a fight that had already found its way to his doorstep. Inside, the fire crackled. Outside, the wind carried the echo of retreating hooves. Cole knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The fire had burned low by the time Cole and Claire finally sat across from one another at the table. The baby, now asleep in the cot, stirred occasionally, but made no sound. The room felt too small for the weight of what hung between them. Claire's fingers twisted together in her lap, her gaze fixed on the scarred wood of the table, as though answers might be carved into it. Hull's hands were braced on the edge, his knuckles white. You're going to have to tell me the truth, he said at last. His voice was quiet but left no room for argument. Claire looked up slowly, her eyes rimmed red. I didn't want you to find out this way. You didn't want me to find out at all. Cole counted, his tone hardening. She flinched but didn't deny it. Who are they? He asked. And why do they think they've got some claim to that child? Claire took a long, shaking breath. His name is James, she said softly, glancing toward the cot where the baby slept. He's mine. My husband. Her voice broke on the word. My husband died last spring. He owed men like Trent. When he couldn't pay, they came for me. They said I was theirs now that I belonged to them, the way a horse or a piece of land might. I ran. I've been running ever since. Cole leaned back, exhaling through his nose, eyes narrowing as the pieces began to fall into place. So Trent thinks the baby's part of what your husband owed. Claire nodded, tears spilling over now. They think James is leverage. If they take him, I'll have no choice but to follow. Cole scrubbed a hand over his face, the roughness of his stubble rasping against his palm, and Nathan knew. Her gaze dropped again. He knew enough. He knew I needed a way out. He offered me a home, said he didn't care about my past. Cole's chest tightened. He could picture Nathan, kind to a fault, always believing he could fix what the world had broken. He'd taken her in without asking questions, just like Cole had seen him do 100 times before. Cole pushed back from the table, standing abruptly. They'll come back, he said. You heard him. Claire rose too, her hands trembling. You don't have to get involved. This isn't your fight. Cole turned on her eyes hard. Like hell it isn't. Nathan made me promise to take care of you. That means him too. He jerked his chin toward the cot. Whether I like it or not, that child's under my roof. That makes this my fight. Claire stared at him, her lips parting slightly as though to argue, but no words came. The rest of the night passed in silence. Cole sat by the window rifle across his knees now, watching the dark tree line for any sign of movement. Claire lay on the cot beside James, but Cole doubted she slept. The tension in the room was a living thing, coiled and ready to strike. When dawn finally broke gray and cold, Cole felt no relief. He stepped outside, breath clouding in the frigid air, scanning the horizon. The snow was churned up where Trent's horses had stood, but the tracks led away, at least for now. Nathan's grave on the ridge loomed in the distance, a silent reminder of everything Cole had already lost. He stood there for a long moment, staring up at it, the cold wind biting at his face. I don't know what you'd want me to do, he murmured, voice low enough that no one else could hear. But I made you a promise. I'm keeping it. By mid-morning, Cole had saddled both horses. Claire emerged from the cabin. James swaddled against her chest, eyes wide with uncertainty. Where are we going? She asked. Town, Cole said simply. We need supplies. And if Trent's men are out there, I want eyes on who's asking about us. The ride down to town was quiet. Claire kept her gaze fixed on the snow-dusted pines, clutching James tightly as though he might vanish if she loosened her grip. Cole rode slightly ahead, every sense on alert. Each crack of a branch or distant echo of hooves set his teeth on edge. When they finally reached town, Cole could feel the stares. News had already traveled. Nathan Mercer dead. Cole wed to a stranger who'd appeared from nowhere. He ignored the whispers, walking into the general store with his head high. He gathered supplies quickly. Flour, coffee, ammunition, while Claire hovered near the door, trying to make herself small. Then a voice drooled from the corner. Heard you got yourself hitched awful fast, Mercer. Cole turned slowly. A man he recognized only vaguely. Tom Garrison, a rancher with a mean streak, was leaning against the counter, a smirk tugging at his lips. Cole didn't answer, just paid for the supplies and turned to leave. But Garrison wasn't done. His gaze slid to Claire, then to the baby in her arms. That him don't look much like you. Something in Cole snapped. He stepped toward Garrison, his voice low and cold. You got something to say it plain. Garrison's smirk faltered just a little, but he didn't back down. Just seems strange as all. Folks are talking. They're saying she brought trouble with her. And from the looks of you two, I'd say they're right. Before Cole could reply, the door banged open. A man stumbled in, panting hard. Mercer, there's riders headed straight this way. Cole's blood ran cold. He didn't need to ask who. He turned to Claire. Get back to the cabin now. Her face had gone pale, but she didn't argue. She clutched James close and hurried out to the horses. Cole grabbed his rifle, jaw set. They won't take her, he muttered under his breath. The first shots rang out just as Claire mounted up, the sharp crack of gunfire echoing through the street. People scattered, diving for cover, as Trent and his men rode into town, their eyes locked on Cole Mercer. Gunfire tore through the morning air, the sharp cracks bouncing off the false fronts of the town's buildings as Trent and his men rode in hard. Horses screamed, townsfolk scattered, and Cole felt his gut tighten like a vice. He shoved Claire toward the alley between the general store and the livery. Go, he barked. Get to the horses, ride straight for the ridge. Don't stop. Claire's eyes were wide with terror, but she didn't waste time arguing. She clutched James close and darted down the narrow alley skirts, snagging on crates as she went. Cole spun back toward the street rifle raised just as Trent swung down from his horse revolver, already in hand. Mercer. Trent's grin was all teeth, vicious and bright. Thought we'd make this simple. You give me the girl and the brat, and we let you live. Cole leveled his rifle, the barrel unwavering. You'll get neither. The first rider to his left tried to rush him, but Cole fired unclean shot that sent the man tumbling from his saddle, screaming as he hit the frozen ground. Chaos erupted then. Bullets slamming into barrels and posts, the acrid smell of gunpowder thick in the air. Cole ducked behind a water trough, working the rifle's lever in smooth, practiced motions. But there were too many of them. For every man he forced to scatter, another moved in closer, cutting off any chance of retreat. Across the street, Trent crouched behind a wagon, his revolver spitting fire with each shot. Don't matter how many you drop, Mercer, you can't win this. But Cole wasn't thinking about winning. He was thinking about Claire, about the promise he'd made to Nathan as his brother's life slipped away. He leaned out just long enough to fire again, forcing another rider back. Then he heard Ethu's pounding hard down the alley. Claire was on the move. James cradled tight against her chest as she pushed the horse to a desperate gallop. Go! Cole roared, covering her retreat with a volley of gunfire. Trent saw her too. His face twisted, and he barked an order to the nearest man. After her! The rider spurred his horse, tearing off after Claire. Cole's stomach dropped. He bolted from cover, sprinting across the open street as bullets winded past his ears. He vaulted into the saddle of Nathan's old bay. Kicking hard, the horse surged forward, snow spraying under its hooves, as Cole charged after the rider. The chase tore through the pine's branches, whipping at Cole's face as the wind howled around them. He could see Claire ahead, her horse struggling to keep pace. James' cries faint but unmistakable. The rider reached for her reins. Claire swerved wildly, nearly losing her seat but held firm. Cole raised the rifle one-handed, his vision narrowing to a single point. He fired. The shot rang true. The rider pitched sideways, tumbling from the saddle into the snow. Claire didn't look back. She just rode harder. Cole slowed only long enough to make sure the man wasn't getting back up. Then he turned his horse, scanning the trees. No sign of Trent or the others. Not yet. He spurred the bay onward until he caught up with Claire. She was pale lips, bloodless, but she hadn't dropped the reins. You all right? Cole called over the pounding of hooves. Claire nodded jerkily, though the tears on her cheeks betrayed her fear. Where do we go? The ridge, he said grimly. It's the only ground we know better than they do. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was sinking behind the pines. Cole didn't stop to rest. He unsettled the horses, then hauled out the old wooden crates from under the porch, crates filled with the ammunition Nathan had stockpiled for years, but never had reason to use. Claire watched him. James swaddled tight in her arms, her expression torn between fear and disbelief. You're really going to fight them here? She asked softly. Cole looked up, sweat and snow clinging to his hair. You got a better idea. She didn't. They worked in silence. Cole boarding up the windows, setting out the rifles, checking every round of ammunition, while Claire boiled water and tried to quiet James. Each time the baby whimpered, Cole's jaw tightened. If Trent and his men didn't kill him, the noise just might. Night fell heavy, the pines groaning under the weight of snow. Cole sat by the window, rifle in hand, every muscle in his body coiled tight. Claire sat across from him, rocking James gently, her lips moving in silent prayer. Then the sound came. Hooves slow this time, deliberate. Cole's blood ran cold. He rose silently, signaling Claire to stay quiet. Together they watched as dark shapes emerged from the treine. 5 riders this time, maybe more, their silhouettes long in the moonlight. Trent's voice carried through the night like a blade. Mercer, you got one chance. Hand her over or we burn you out. Cole tightened his grip on the rifle. You'll have to come in and take her. Silence. Then the riders dismounted. Blair clutched James closer, her face pale as bone. Cole glanced back at her. No matter what happens, he said softly. You don't open that door. She swallowed hard, nodding. Outside, boots crunched in the snow. The siege had begun. The first torch arced through the night sky, landing just short of the porch. Flames licked hungrily at the snow before sputtering out, leaving behind a trail of smoke. Another followed closer this time, and the fire clung to the wooden steps. Cole didn't hesitate. He raised the rifle and fired. The shot cracked through the night, and one of the riders dropped his torch, falling uselessly into the snow. The others scattered, diving for cover behind trees and rocks. But Trent's voice rang out again, sharp and furious. Burn him out! Don't let up! Cole worked the rifle's lever and fired again. Each shot found its mark or forced the men back, but they kept pressing forward, their torches flaring brighter against the dark. Claire crouched low behind the table. James bundled tightly against her chest. She rocked him gently, whispering soft, frantic prayers, as though her words alone might shield him from the bullets slamming into the cabin's walls. A window shattered. Cole ducked as splinters rained down, then swung the barrel of the rifle toward the opening and fired. A shout answered him, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting snow. But there were too many of them. Trent stepped into view, crouched low but moving steadily closer, a cruel grin twisting his mouth. You can't hold out forever, Mercer. You got one door, four walls, and a baby crying loud enough to lead us right in. You're done. Cole's jaw clenched. He reloaded, movement swift and practiced, and fired again. Trent dove behind a tree, the bullet chewing through bark inches from his head. The flames on the porch grew hotter. Smoke curled under the door, choking the room with its bitter tang. Claire coughed, eyes watering, as she pulled James's blanket up over his face. Cole glanced at her. Back door, he rasped. Get to the horse's ride for town. I won't leave you, she shot back, her voice cracking. You think I'm asking? He snapped, firing again, before ducking back down. Go! Tears streaked his face as she stared at him, then at the baby. Finally, she nodded. She crept to the back door, easing it open just enough to slip out into the night. Cole covered her retreat, each shot precise and measured. He didn't let himself think about whether she would make it, whether Trent had posted men in the trees beyond the cabin. He just kept firing one round after another until the rifle clicked empty. He dropped it and grabbed the revolver from the table. The flames were higher now, licking at the roof. The smoke burned his lungs with every breath. Mercer Trent's voice again. Closer this time. Ain't no shame in giving up. Hand her over and we'll let you walk away. Hole stepped to the doorway. Revolver raised, his silhouette framed by firelight. You want her, he said, voice low and deadly. Come take her. Trent moved fast. 2 shots rang out, tone from Trent, one from Cole. Cole felt the searing pain tear through his shoulder, but he didn't stop. He fired again. Trent staggered back, a curse ripping from his throat as blood bloomed dark against his coat. The others hesitated. Cole's vision swam, his strength draining fast, but he held his ground. Then hoofbeats. Claire. She hadn't gone to town. She'd circled wide, looping back with both horses at a dead run. She reined in, hard eyes, wild, one hand outstretched. Cole, get on. Cole didn't think. He bolted from the doorway, teeth gritted against the pane. Bullets chased him through the night, splintering the porch rails and thudding into the snow at his feet. He grabbed Claire's hands, swung into the saddle behind her, and kicked the horse into motion. Trent roared, firing blindly, but they were already tearing through the trees, snow flying beneath pounding hooves. Cole wrapped one arm around Claire's waist. The other pressed hard against his bleeding shoulder. Don't stop, he rasped. Don't look back. Claire didn't. She leaned low over the horse's neck, urging it faster, faster still. Behind them, Trent's furious shouts echoed through the night, but a headly darkness and the narrow hope that they might still outrun what was coming for them. They rode until the horse was luthered and trembling, finally stopping in a dense grove miles from the cabin. Claire slid down, clutching James tightly. Cole nearly toppled out of the saddle, his strength gone, blood soaking through his coat. Cole. Claire's voice shook as she knelt beside him, her free hand pressing to the wound. Stay with me, please. Just stay with me. Cole's eyes fluttered, his breath shallow. Don't let them take him, he muttered. They won't, she whispered fiercely. Not while I'm still breathing. Far off in the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of riders. Trent wasn't done. Not yet. Cole's breaths came shallow and uneven, each one sending a jagged stab of pain through his shoulder. The bleeding hadn't stopped. Claire knelt beside him, her skirts heavy with snow. James bundled in one arm, while her free hand pressed desperately against the wound. The darkness around them was suffocating, silent, but for the labored breaths of the horse and the faint, distant echoes of pursuit. You're losing too much blood, Claire whispered, her voice trembling as she tore at her shawl, fashioning a crude bandage. You have to stay awake, Cole. You hear me? Stay with me. His eyes opened, just barely glassy with pain. You should have gone, he muttered, and leave you. Claire's voice cracked sharp with something like anger. I won't. You're not dying out here. Not for me. Far off. A single branch snapped. Claire's heart leapt into her throat. She glanced toward the dark line of pines, straining to see. Nothing moved, but the sound had been real, too deliberate to be the wind. She dragged Cole upright with surprising strength, hooking her arm under his and half hauling him toward the horse. We can't stay here, she hissed. They're coming. Cole gritted his teeth against the pain, his legs barely holding. They got him into the saddle, Claire climbing up behind him. James held close to her chest. With one last look at the shadows creeping between the trees, she snapped the reins. The horse lurched forward, its hooves thundering against the frozen earth. Claire bent low, whispering prayers she barely remembered from childhood. As the night swallowed them whole, they rode blind, guided only by moonlight, through the tangled forest paths Nathan had once shown Cole as a boy. Cole's head sagged forward, his strength fading. Claire kept one hand tight on the reins, the other bracing his weight, all while keeping James swaddled safe against her. Finally, the trees opened into a narrow clearing. A small hunting shack stood crooked against the hillside, its roof half caved and door hanging loose on one hinge. Claire didn't hesitate. She slid down, dragging Cole with her inside. The air was stale and cold, but it was shelter. She lowered Cole onto the dirt floor, her hands shaking violently as she tried to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me," she begged. "Please, Cole, stay awake." His eyes fluttered. "You and the boy. We're safe," she said quickly, even though they weren't. A sudden rustle outside froze her. Hooves, voices. Claw's stomach twisted. Trent had found them. She darted to the broken door, peering out through the crack. Shadows moved between the trees for maybe 5 riders this time. Trent's voice cut through the night, smooth and taunting. "You think you can run forever, Mercer? You can't hide her from me. That baby belongs to me." Cole stirred weakly his hand, fumbling toward the revolver still holstered at his side. Claire caught it, shaking her head fiercely. "You can't fight like this," she whispered. He met her eyes, pain and defiance wearing in his expression. "Then you have to—" Claire froze. "You think I can shoot a gun?" she asked, her voice breaking. Cole's gaze didn't waver. "You can if it means keeping him safe." Her hand trembled as she unbuckled the holster, the revolver heavier than she expected. Outside, Trent's voice grew closer. "I gave you a chance, Mercer. Now I'm taking what's mine." Claire looked down at James, who whimpered softly in his blanket, and then at Cole's face, pale jaw clenched against the pain. For the first time since she'd met him, there was no wall of stoicism between them, just a man on the edge of death, trusting her with everything that mattered. Her fear hardened into something sharper. She tucked James safely in the corner of the shack, then crouched by the door, the revolver steady in her grip. The first rider stepped into the clearing, torchlight flickering across his face. Blair didn't think. She fired. The man fell, the torch tumbling from his grasp. Chaos erupted. Shouts rang out as Trent's men scrambled for cover. Claire fired again, and another man dropped screaming as he hit the ground. "Find her!" Trent roared. But she didn't stop. Each shot bought them seconds, just enough to make Trent hesitate, to make him realize she wasn't the helpless woman he'd expected. Then the revolver clicked empty. Claire's breath came in ragged gasps. Outside, Trent laughed. "You think you're a fighter, girl. You just made it worse." The sound of boots crunching closer. Claire backed toward Cole, fumbling for the rifle, leaning against the wall. He was pale now, barely conscious, but he forced out one word. "Finish it." The door creaked. Trent stepped inside, eyes burning with fury, and Claire, heart pounding, hands shaking, raised the rifle and aimed straight at him. The rifle felt impossibly heavy in Claire's hands. Her breath came fast and shallow as Trent stepped into the shack, his boots crunching on the dirt floor. Torchlights spilled in behind him, casting long, twisted shadows on the broken walls. His lips curled into a cruel smile as his eyes swept over her. Then to Cole, slumped against the wall, pale and bleeding. "Well, ain't this a picture?" Trent drooled. "The mighty Mercer half dead on the ground, and his little wife playing hero." Claire's grip tightened on the rifle. "Stay where you are," she warned, though her voice trembled. Trent chuckled, stepping closer. "You won't shoot me? Women like you never do. You've been running too long to stand your ground now." "I said don't move." Behind him, 2 of his men flanked the doorway, rifles at the ready. Claire's heart pounded, but she didn't lower the weapon. Trent tilted his head, studying her. "You really think you and Mercer are going to keep that brat? He's worth more than you know. Your husband owed me, sweetheart. Every debt's got to be paid." Claire's fear hardened into rage. Her hands stopped shaking. "He's not yours," she said, her voice low and steady. Trent sneered and took another step. "You're not going to." The rifle cracked. Trent staggered, shock flashing across his face before he crumpled to the ground. Everything went still. The two men at the door froze, staring at their fallen leader. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Cole, summoning the last of his strength, raised the revolver from where he sat slumped against the wall. "Get out!" he rasped. The men hesitated only a second before bolting into the night, their torches vanishing between the trees. Claire stood rooted to the spot, the rifle still aimed where Trent had been. Her chest rose and fell in ragged bursts, her ears ringing from the shot. Poles' hand dropped the revolver, slipping from his grasp. "Claire." His voice was weak, slurred. She dropped the rifle and rushed to his side, tears streaming freely down her face. "Don't you dare leave me now," she begged, pressing both hands against his wound again. "I didn't just fight for you to die on me." His eyes fluttered open, heavy, but still holding that same unyielding steadiness. "You didn't freeze," he murmured, a faint pained smile tugging at his lips. "I wasn't going to," she whispered fiercely. The seconds stretched long and uncertain as she worked to stop the bleeding, ripping her skirts into strips for bandages. James whimpered softly in the corner, the sound painfully fragile. Cole groaned as she tightened the makeshift bandage. "That's cruel," he muttered. "It's saving your life," she shot back, her voice breaking on the last word. Outside, the forest was quiet now. No shouts, no gunfire, just the wind threading through the pines, carrying away the remnants of battle. Cole's eyelids drooped, his strength ebbing fast. Claire shook his shoulders gently. "Don't sleep. Please, Cole, don't sleep yet. I can't do this without you." He looked at her, his expression soft despite the pain. "You already did," he whispered. Her chest tightened painfully. "Don't you dare talk like that. You're going to make it. I won't let you do anything else." But his eyes were closing, his breaths growing shallow. Blair grabbed the rifle again, her head snapping toward the doorway at the sound of a twig snapping outside. A shadow moved past the broken war loan of Trent's men, creeping closer. Claire's stomach dropped. She was out of bullets. The man stepped through the doorway, knife glinting in his hand. Claire's mind screamed for her to move, but her body wouldn't obey. Then a gunshot. The man fell, blood blooming dark against his chest. Cole's revolver smoked faintly in his hand, where it rested weakly on his thigh. His arm dropped immediately after the weapon, clattering to the floor. Claire's heart lurched as she turned back to him. "Cole?" But his eyes had finally closed, his chest rising only shallowly. "Stay with me," she begged again, shaking his shoulder as tears blurred her vision. "Please, just stay." From far-off hooves thundered through the trees more riders. Whether friend or foe, she didn't know. She had seconds to decide if she'd stand her ground again or run, and this time she had no bullets left. The thunder of hooves grew louder, echoing through the trees like distant drums. Claire crouched low over Cole, torn between hope and dread. If it was Trent's remaining men, there was nothing left she could. No bullets, no strength left in her arms. Cole's revolver lay useless on the dirt beside her, its chambers empty. James stirred in the corner, his tiny whimpers barely audible over the pounding of horses. Claire grabbed him, clutching him tightly to her chest as her eyes darted between Cole's ashen face and the broken doorway. The first horse burst into the clearing. Claire braced for the worst, but it wasn't Trent's men. It was Sheriff Avery, his rifle raised, followed by 2 deputies and half a dozen townsfolk with shotguns and hunting rifles. The torches of more riders flickered behind them, men from the nearby ranches who must have followed the chaos out of town. "Claire." Avery barked, eyes scanning the scene before landing on Cole slumped against the wall. She couldn't answer. Her throat felt tight, strangled by relief and terror all at once. "Get the doc," Avery shouted to one of the riders, who wheeled his horse and galloped back toward town. 2 others dismounted and rushed inside, their faces grim as they took in Trent's body, sprawled on the floor, and the blood pooling beneath Cole. "Is he alive?" Avery demanded. Claire nodded frantically. "Barely. He needs help now." One of the men knelt beside Cole, pressing fresh cloth against the wound. "Bullets still in there. He won't last the ride if we don't stop the bleeding." "Then stop it," Claire snapped, her voice breaking. Please, just save him." They worked quickly, grim determination etched into their faces as they stemmed the flow of blood. Cole's stirred, weakly eyes fluttering open for a brief second before sliding shut again. "Stay awake, Mercer," Avery growled. "Don't you quit on her now." Minutes felt like hours. Claire held James tight, rocking back and forth, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out every other sound. Finally, the bleeding slowed. "He's stable enough to move," one of the men said. "But we've got to get him back to town before he slips again." Two of them lifted Cole gently onto a horse, one man climbing up behind him to hold him steady. Claire mounted another horse with James bundled tightly against her chest. The ride back was agonizing. Every stumble of the horse, every groan from Cole felt like it stretched time thinner and thinner. Claire couldn't stop looking at him, his head lolling forward, his skin pale and slick with sweat. She whispered his name over and over, as if saying it might tether him to her. When they finally burst through the edge of town, the doctor was already waiting outside his office. Sleeves rolled to the elbow, a grim set to his mouth. "Inside," he ordered. Claire slid from the horse, her legs shaking so badly she almost fell. She didn't even remember handing James to one of the townsfolk. It all blurred together as she followed Cole inside. They laid him on the table. The doctor didn't waste a second. Claire Avery said softly, catching her arm, "You need to wait outside. Let him work." "I can't." "You have to," Avery said firmly, though his eyes were kind. She stepped back reluctantly, her gaze locked on Cole as the door shut between them. The minutes dragged. Each muffled sound, the clink of instruments, the low voices of men helping the doctor, felt like a hammer against her chest. At some point, James began to cry. Claire took him in her arms again, swaying gently as tears ran silently down her cheeks. She thought of Nathan, promise Cole had made. Of every moment since the day she'd met Cole, a stranger who had taken her in, not because he had to, but because it was what his brother would have wanted, and she realized she didn't want to just be his brother's widow anymore. She wanted him. The door opened finally. Claire's head snapped up. The doctor stood there, weary but steady. "He's alive," the doctor said simply. "He's not out of danger yet, but if he makes it through tonight, he's got a chance." Her knees nearly buckled with relief. "Go on," the doctor said, stepping aside. "He's asking for you." Claire walked inside James, still in her arms. Cole lay pale and weak, his chest rising shallowly, but his eyes were open, and they found hers immediately. "You stayed," he whispered, his voice. "Of course I did." He managed the faintest of smiles. "Nathan would have been proud." Claire set James gently beside him, tears sliding down her face. "I'm proud too," she whispered. "But you're not leaving me. Not now." His hand found hers, weak but sure. "Not planning to," he murmured. But the night wasn't over. A deputy burst into the room, face pale. "Sheriff Trent's brothers are riding in. 6 of them armed to the teeth. They say this ain't over." Claire's blood ran cold. Avery swore under his breath. "Get everyone ready. This town's not losing anyone else tonight." Cole's grip on her hand tightened weakly. "They're not going to stop," he rasped. Claire looked down at him, fear and resolve wearing inside her. "Then we don't stop either." Outside, the sound of hoof-beats returned louder, angrier, closer than before. And Claire realized the fight for their lives had only just begun. The hoofbeats grew into a pounding roar, shaking the ground beneath them. Men shouted outside, voices hard and angry. Claire moved instinctively to the window, clutching James close as she peered through the warped glass. Porches burned like jagged stars in the night. Half a dozen riders circling the edge of town, their faces hard, their rifles gleaming in the firelight. At their head was Silas Crowley Trent's older brother, his expression carved in stone. Sheriff Avery stepped into the street, rifle in hand, his badge catching the torchlight. Beside him, townsfolk gathered, farmers, ranch hands, shopkeepers. They weren't soldiers, but every man there carried a weapon. "You boys turn around and ride out." Avery called, his voice steady and commanding. "You've caused enough blood tonight." Silas laughed coldly, spitting in the dirt. "Your tin star don't mean a damn thing to me, Sheriff. My brother's dead, and the man who shot him is in that building right there. You want justice?" "There's a judge for that," Avery shot back. "I ain't here for justice." Silas leaned forward in the saddle, eyes burning. "I'm here for blood." Inside, Cole stirred, grimacing as he tried to push himself upright. "Help me up," he rasped. Claire turned sharply toward him. "You're not moving. You'll bleed out." "I won't sit here and watch them come for you," he said, his voice but firm. She shook her head fiercely, tears stinging her eyes. "You can't fight. Not like this. Let me handle it." "You don't have to." I will, she cut in. Outside, Silas gave the signal. The riders spread out, forming a semicircle around the building. Claire grabbed the rifle, leaning against the wall, and checked the chamber. Empty. Her stomach twisted. She reached for Cole's revolver. 3 bullets left. Take James, she told Avery's deputy, who had just stepped inside to check on them. Keep him safe no matter what. Claire, the deputy, started. Do it! He swallowed hard, nodded, and took the baby gently from her arms. Claire stepped out into the street. The night air bit at her skin, but she didn't flinch. The revolver was steady in her grip as she faced Silas and his men. You want Cole? You'll have to kill me first, she said, her voice carrying clear and sharp. Silas tilted his head, a cruel smile creeping over his face. Don't tempt me, girl. A shot cracked from behind one of the wagons, Avery's men firing the first round. Chaos erupted. Bullets tore through the night torches, crashing to the ground as the fight exploded in the street. Claire ducked behind a water trough, firing. One Sunrider toppled from his horse. Reload her, someone shouted, tossing her another revolver. She caught it, spinning out from cover to fire again. Her hands shook, but every shot was for Cole, for James, for the life they were supposed to have. Silas dismounted, stalking toward the building with a shotgun in his hands. Mercer, he bellowed, come out and face me like a man. Claire stepped into his path. You'll deal with me, he laughed bitterly. You think you can stop me? I don't think. I know. He raised the shotgun. A single shot rang out sharp. Final Silas staggered, a hole blooming in his chest before he crashed to the ground. Holes stood in the doorway, pale and swaying, but alive, the smoking rifle still in his grip. For a moment, silence reigned. The remaining riders looked between Silas's fallen body and Cole's bloodied frame, and then one by one they turned their horses and fled into the night. The street was littered with smoldering torches, the air thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Claire rushed to Cole, catching him as he nearly collapsed into her arms. You idiot, she whispered, tears spilling freely. You should have stayed inside. He gave her the faintest of smiles. Couldn't let you have all the glory. The fight was over, but as Claire held him close, she knew this wasn't the end of their story, just the beginning of something they hadn't dared hope for. Cole's fingers brushed James's blanket as the deputy brought him back over. You kept him safe, Cole murmured. We both did, she whispered. Cole's eyes closed, but this time it wasn't from weakness, just relief. The first light of dawn broke over the rooftops, washing the street in pale gold, and for the first time since they'd met, Claire felt like maybe they had a future waiting on the other side of survival. The morning sun crept over the horizon, casting a pale gold light across the battered street. Smoke drifted lazily from dying torches, mingling with the lingering smell of gunpowder. The town was waking, but it wasn't the usual quiet start to the day. It was the heavy silence that came after chaos, after loss. Claire sat on the steps outside the doctor's office, James bundled safely in her arms. His tiny breaths were soft against her chest, and she focused on them like they were the only real thing in the world. Her skirt was still damp with blood cools blood, and the memory of last night felt too close, too raw. The door opened behind her, and she turned sharply, heart leaping. Cole stepped out slowly, one arm and shoulder tightly bandaged, his movements stiff but determined. The doctor had warned him to stay in bed, but Cole Mercer had never been one to follow orders. He lowered himself beside her on the steps, wincing, but saying nothing about the pain. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The street was quiet except for the soft calls of towns, folk tidying up, putting out small fires, tending to the wounded. You shouldn't be out here, Claire said finally, her voice low. Cole's lips curved faintly. And miss the sunrise? Not a chance. She shook her head, but her mouth twitched with the faintest hint of a smile. They sat there side by side, watching the light spread slowly across the town. The same town that had stood with them, that had chosen to fight when walking away, would have been easier. He almost lost both of us last night, Claire whispered, looking down at James. Clee's gaze followed hers, softening, as he watched the baby's tiny fingers flex against the blanket. But he didn't, he said simply, because you wouldn't let him. Claire swallowed hard. Because we wouldn't. He nodded, his jaw tightening just slightly, as if admitting it cost him something. She hesitated, then spoke quietly. You don't have to stay because of Nathan anymore. You've done enough for me for James. If you want to go, I won't hold you to a promise you didn't have to make." Cole turned to her fully, then his dark eyes unwavering. "Claire," he said, his voice steady, despite the weakness still etched in his features. "I'm not staying because of a promise anymore." Her breath caught. "I stayed alive last night for you." He said each word deliberate. "And for him, not because I owed Nathan, because I wanted to." Tears welled in her eyes, but she let them fall, not bothering to hide them anymore. "I don't want to just survive anymore," she whispered. "Then we won't," he said simply. For the first time, she believed him. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything settling between them. Then Cole reached out hesitantly, as though he wasn't sure he had the right. She placed her hand in his, and his fingers closed around hers, warm and steady despite the bandages. Behind them, Sheriff Avery stepped into the street, his rifle slung across his back now. His voice carried easily across the morning air. "Town's safe. Trent's men are gone for good. What's left of them won't be back." Claire looked up at the sheriff, who gave her a nod of quiet respect. "You two have a choice now. Stay. Go. Whatever you do, you've got people here who'll stand by you." Aver's words lingered even after he walked away, leaving them alone again. Cole exhaled slowly, staring at the horizon. "I've been fighting ghosts for years," he said softly. "Maybe it's time to stop looking back." Claire turned to him, the morning light painting his features in gold. "What do you want to do?" He looked at her. Really looked like it was the first time he'd allowed himself to hope. "I want a life with you, with him." His eyes flicked to James. "I don't care where, don't care how. I just want it to be real." Her chest ached with something too big to name. "Then let's have it," she whispered. Cole's smile was small, tired, but there was a quiet certainty in it that hadn't been there before. The rest of the morning passed slowly. Townsfolk came by with food, with kind words, with promises of help, rebuilding, whatever came next. Claire accepted their thanks, but didn't languish a stay by Cole, by James, unwilling to let go, even for a second. Later, as the sun climbed higher, Cole insisted on walking slowly, carefully to the edge of town. Claire stayed close, ready to steady him when his strength faltered. From the ridge, they could see the open land stretching for miles, the snow still clinging stubbornly to the ground in patches, but already giving way to spring. Cole took it in, his face unreadable for a long moment. "Wherever we go," he murmured finally, "that's where I'll be." Claire tightened her grip on his hand. "Then let's go home." Wherever that ends up being, James stirred in her arms, letting out a soft, contented sigh, as if he understood. Cole looked at him and then at her, his eyes steady. "We'll make it work," he said quietly. Claire nodded, feeling for the first time in years, not fear, not grief, but something fragile and bright that felt like hope. As they turned back toward town, the morning sun warmed their faces, chasing away the cold that had ruled for so long. And Claire knew deep in her bones that this wasn't just survival anymore. It was the start of the life they were going to build together. No ghosts, no debts, just them. And for the first time since Nathan died, Cole Mercer smiled without guilt. Spring came slowly, as if the land itself was hesitant to believe winter had finally loosened its grip. Snow retreated to the highest ridges. The rivers swelled with melt water, and the once dead earth began to wake in patches of timid green. It was a strange thing for Cole Mercer to see, after so much cold, so much blood and loss, that life could quietly return as though none of it had happened. He healed slowly too. The first weeks after that night were a blur of bandages, fevers that left him shaking, and days where even standing felt like a fight he couldn't win. Claire never left his side. She fed him spoonfuls of broth when he was too weak to hold the bowl himself, stayed awake when he tossed in fevered half-leap, and sat by his bed reading softly from one of Nathan's old books until he drifted off again. The townsfolk came often checking on him, checking on her. It wasn't pity they brought, though it was respect. Cole Mercer, the man who'd once been known more for his wandering silence than for any kindness, had stood up when it mattered most. The sheriff stopped by nearly every evening, sometimes with a small sack of coffee beans or a newspaper from the next town over. Even the blacksmith, a man who'd never liked Cole much, brought by a set of hand-carved toys for James. By the time Cole could walk without wincing, it was already late spring. The day he first stepped outside on his own, the air was bright and warm, filled with the smell of wet earth and wildflowers. Claire had been in the yard with James watching the boy toddle after a stray chicken with delighted squeals. She looked up and saw Cole in the doorway, thinner, slower, but alive and steady. "You're supposed to be resting," she'd teased gently, though her eyes shone with something she didn't try to hide. "Been resting too damn long," he'd muttered, stepping down carefully. Each step hurt, but it felt like claiming something back with every inch he walked. That night, for the first time since the fight, Cole slept deeply without dreams. By June, they'd moved into a cabin on the edge of Toner Place Coal, and Nathan had once built together back in the days when they thought they'd grow old side by side. It had sat empty for years, but it didn't take much to bring it back to life. Claire planted flowers in the window boxes, their colors bright against the weathered wood. James chased chickens in the yard, while Cole fixed the old fence rail and mended the roof with the sheriff's help. The first morning they woke there, Claire stood in the doorway, with James in her arms, watching Cole as he chopped wood. His movements were still careful, slower than they used to be, but strong. He caught her looking, offered the faintest smile, and she felt something tighten sweetly in her chest. "Feels strange," he said later, sitting on the porch steps with sweat still damp on his brow. "Feels normal." She had only nodded, afraid if she spoke she might cry. As the weeks passed, life took on a rhythm Claire hadn't known she'd craved. The townsfolk came often, sometimes to share meals, sometimes just to sit on the porch and talk about nothing at all. Claire found herself laughing again, real laughter that didn't feel like it would crack in her throat. One warm evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the sky a soft gold, Cole brought out a small wooden horse. He'd been carving for weeks. He placed it in James's tiny hands, and the boy squealed with delight, banging it on the porch floor. Claire watched the two of them, her heart swelling with something too big to name. Later that night, after James had fallen asleep, she sat by the fire with Cole. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked suddenly. Cole looked up from where he'd been sharpening a knife, brow furrowed. "Leaving, going somewhere else, somewhere far, where nobody knows us." He stared into the flames for a long time before answering. "I used to think running fixed things, but all I ever did was carry the past with me. No matter how far I went, it followed." Claire studied him quietly. "And now," he met her gaze, something steady and certain in his eyes. "Now I think this is where we're supposed to be." She nodded slowly, reaching out to cover his hand with hers. For once, there was no weight between them, no ghosts lingering in the corners. Weeks later, a letter arrived. The paper was worn and the writing rough, but it was from one of Nathan's old friends, a man who'd heard whispers of what had happened in town. The letter was short, barely a few lines, but it held the only words Cole needed to read. Nathan would have been proud. He read the letter 3 times before quietly folding it away, tucking it into the top drawer of the dresser. He didn't tell Claire right away, he didn't need to, but that night when he sat beside her and James as they slept, he felt lighter than he had in years. By late summer, Cole was strong again. He worked in town a few days each week, hauling lumber, helping mend fences, doing whatever odd jobs needed doing. Claire spent her mornings tending to the garden, her afternoons baking bread, or mending clothes for neighbors who paid her in flour, eggs, or milk. The town had embraced them, not out of pity, but out of quiet loyalty. After what Cole and Claire had endured, after what they'd stood for, they weren't just strangers anymore. They belonged. One autumn evening, Claire stood in the yard, the cool air brushing her cheeks as she watched the stars prick through the night sky. Cole came up behind her, wrapping his arms carefully around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. She leaned back against him. "I didn't think happiness would ever feel this simple." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Guess we finally found it." Inside, James let out a sleepy cry, and Claire turned, smiling faintly as she stepped back into the warm glow of their home. Cole watched her for a long moment before following. For the first time in years, there was no guilt pressing on his chest, no sense of debt unpaid. He wasn't surviving anymore. He was living. And as the door closed behind them, the firelight spilling out briefly before vanishing into the night, Cole Mercer knew that the promise he'd once made to his dying brother hadn't just been fulfilled. It had built the life Nathan would have wanted for him all along. Years slipped by in quiet, steady seasons. The cabin on the edge of town became more than just a home. It became a place people came to for warmth, advice, or just a kind word. James grew like the weeds Claire was forever pulling from her garden, quick, unstoppable, and full of life. By his 5th birthday, he was already racing through the yard on a pony Cole had bartered for from a nearby rancher. Cole aged 2. He wasn't old yet, but the years of wandering and fighting had left their mark. His shoulders ached after long days of work, and faint scars still tugged at his skin when the weather turned cold. But when he looked at Claire across the table in the evenings, her hair looser now, star with threads of gold from the sun, he felt younger than he'd ever been. Life had become steady, but it hadn't been without change. The town had grown new, families had come, shops had opened, and talk of a rail line coming through had everyone speculating about what it might mean for their quiet lives. Cole listened, but he never said much. He was content with what they had, and Claire was too. One autumn morning, Claire received a letter. It bore the name of her sister, someone she hadn't heard from in nearly a decade. The handwriting was careful, almost hesitant, and Claire's hands trembled as she read it on the porch. "Claire, I heard whispers of you. They say you're alive, married, and have a boy. I had to write. I'm coming west. I don't know what I'll find, but I have nowhere else to go." Marjorie Blair sat still for a long time, the paper trembling in her hands. She'd buried that part of her life years ago, the part where she still had family back east before poverty and hardship pulled them apart. She hadn't written in years, convinced her sister had either died or moved on. When Cole stepped onto the porch, she handed him the letter wordlessly. He read it, his brow furrowing slightly. "You want her here?" he asked softly. I don't know," Claire admitted. "She doesn't know what I went through, what my life became." Cole crouched beside her, his hand warm over hers. "She'll see who you are now. That's enough." A month later, Marjorie arrived. She stepped off the stagecoach in a plain dress, her frame thinner than Claire remembered, her hair streaked with gray, despite being only 2 years older. The sisters stared at each other for a long, stunned moment before Claire stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Marjorie." The hug they shared was tight, desperate, the kind only two people who thought they'd lost each other forever could give. Cole stood a little ways back. James perched on his shoulders, watching with quiet understanding. He didn't interrupt. The new summer reunions weren't meant for words. That night they sat by the fire, Marjorie speaking softly of the years she'd survived alone after Claire vanished from her life. There had been no grand stories, only hardship and work that barely kept her fed. Claire told her own story in pieces and details left out, but enough that Marjorie's eyes filled with tears as she reached for her sister's hand. "You made it out," Marjorie whispered. "You found something better." Claire glanced at Cole, who sat in his chair whittling a small bird for James. He met her gaze, offered the faintest smile, and she returned it with one that said everything words couldn't. Life shifted again after that. Marjorie stayed helping with James, tending to the garden, becoming part of a family she hadn't thought she'd ever have. For Cole, it was strange at first, having someone else in the house after years of quiet, but he grew to respect her strength, her quiet loyalty to her sister. But peace, as Cole always knew, was fragile. That winter, rumors came of a wealthy landowner buying up property around town, pushing out families who couldn't pay rising taxes. Cole heard the whispers in the saloon, saw the worry etched into Sheriff Avery's face when he thought no one was watching. One night, Cole sat on the porch long after Claire and James had gone to bed. Marjorie stepped out quietly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You're worried," she said simply. Cole didn't look at her. "Men with money think the land's theirs just because they can write their name on paper. You've fought before," he exhaled slowly. "And I'll fight again if I have to, but I've got more to lose now." Marjorie studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "That's what makes you stronger." Cole not weaker. The next weeks were tense. Letters arrived offering to buy their land, each one more aggressive than the last. Cole burned every single one in the fire. One night, a group of riders appeared at the edge of town, their fine coats too clean for this part of the country. They didn't stay long, just long enough to make their presence known. Sheriff Avery came to the cabin the next morning, his expression grim. "They're coming for the whole valley," he warned. "We've got a fight on our hands." Cole looked at Claire, at James playing in the yard, at Marjorie kneeling beside him. He'd built a life worth keeping, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it. He rose slowly, his face hardening into the quiet determination Claire had come to know so well. "They picked the wrong town," he said, And as the cold wind carried the first flakes of snow across the yard, Claire realized something. This wasn't just survival anymore. It never had been.